Namaste everyone. My name is Shakil. I welcome you all to this webinar on behalf of Mind Mingle. It is precisely 6 o'clock in the evening, and we will just begin the session. We'll start with a small introduction of this webinar. This webinar series basically is an initiative by Mind Mingle, where we plan to host Gopalan Sir's talk every week, focusing on meaningful living, questioning the challenges we all face to stay purposeful in life. And of course, you know that this program will be facilitated by Gopalan sir. Just to give you a small introduction, Gopalan sir started his career as a chartered accountant, and after 8 years in industry, ending as a financial controller, he came in contact with Jiddu Krishnamurti in 1980. He then joined the Valley School Krishnamurti Foundation as a parent first, and then as a teacher in 1983. Since then, he has been teaching and heading multiple Krishnamurti schools. He is not just inspired by Krishnamurti's teaching, but has also lived them all his life, hence carries a great insight on Krishnamurti's teaching about life. Gopalan sir is also one of the most sought after speaker at Mind Mingle platform and the only speaker to give a talk at Mind Mingle, the Inspiration Festival, for 4 consecutive years since 2017 to 20, and have interacted with thousands of people from different walks of life. He has authored 3 books in last 3 years. One is Bud to Blossom, Blooming Creativity in Life and Education. And then 1+1, Infinity or Eternity. And the third one is, which was this year itself published, Insight Obscured by Intellect. So for today's talk, we have 3 other panelists as well with us who will initiate the dialogue and will be inquiring further into the questions opened by Gopalan sir. Our first panelist is Mr. Uttam. Uttamji was born in Bangalore and as an he's an alumnus of the Valley School. He has a doctorate in chemical engineering from Imperial College London and has spent most of his working life designing chemical processes and equipment in the industrial gas industry. He founded and runs Elzion, if I'm pronouncing it correct, a company focused on developing sustainability in the electronics recycling space. He lives in Bangalore with his wife and 2 children and fills his ever dwindling free time with books, sports, and treks, and more recently, logging into online classes. Then we have Mr. T.M. Veera Raghav. Veera Raghav ji is an independent journalist and associate professor at School of Modern Media, UPES, Dehradun. He was former resident editor of The Hindu and ex-senior editor and anchor with CNN News 18. And then we have Dr. Pascal Chazot with us. Dr. Chazot has been an elected member of parliament in France for the French overseas representing the constituency covering Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. He is also the founder of the Mahatma Gandhi International School in Ahmedabad. He is an expert in education and international cooperation and a senior French civil servant with the French Ministry of National Education. Dr. Pascal is a PhD in psychology of education from University of Paris, doctorate of honor in education from University of Paris, rewarded as the best doctoral research. Then doctoral research in Indian system of medicine from University of Sorbonne. And besides these, Pascal holds several master degrees, including master in Sanskrit. Oh, so this session will be started with a like a 15-20 minutes talk by Gopalan sir, and then our panelists will open the dialogue and initiate the conversation. So I would like to invite Gopalan sir to please take it from here. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Namaste, everybody. This is the 5th in this series, Living, Learning, Livelihood. And the topic for today is understanding with the heart, feeling with the gut. What is its place in living, learning, livelihood? Now, all seers talk of understanding with the heart. And not just seers. This expression is there across the world in all languages and all cultures. In Hindi, we say dil se. We don't say man se. So there's a difference. Man se is thought out, but dil se. In Tamil, we say idayathil irinde. And in French, you say dukur. So all this says from the heart. obviously, that expression, understanding with the heart, does not refer to the physical organ which pumps blood through the body. So what then does it refer to? To understand that, let's begin with a slightly different question. What is understanding? Uh, First impression that comes to us and the common meaning that we attribute to this word understanding is that it is an activity of thought and intellect. It is intellect which understands, is what we think. We never really question it. But let's take the example of food. Without food, no being can survive. So when we digest the food, we absorb the carbohydrates, the lipids, the proteins, the minerals. That's absorption into the body. But it doesn't end there. Ultimately, whatever we absorb enters the individual cell and becomes one with of the cell. Once it becomes part of the cell, it can no more be identified as carbohydrate, lipid, or mineral or whatever. Is understanding something similar? So long as what I want to understand is separate from me, I really haven't understood it. But once we understand, it is no more separate. There is nothing to understand left. So can we really know what we have understood if it is separate? This is not an intellectual gymnastics I'm trying, but I'm only trying to say, we think we have to understand, but when understanding is there, does that question arise at all? So then that question comes, what does it mean to know? When we say we want to know something, are we not saying we want to be able to recognize it, capture it within the ambit of thought, and then imagine about it? So recognition, imagination, the two facets of thought create the images which we think represents the understanding. So is this knowing the same as perception? Again, in day-to-day usage and language, we think they are the same. We use perception interchangeably with this process of recognizing and imagination. But are they really the same? What is the process of perception? If we observe this process in ourselves, there is a contact with the world. And that contact gives rise to one of more of 5 sensations: listening, seeing, tasting, touching, or smelling. And the sensations are generated in the sense organs which are located at the periphery of the body: eyes, ears, skin, tongue. These sensations are transduced into electrical impulses, which then go up the nervous system to the brain. So perception occurs in the brain. The brain cannot see, the brain cannot hear. It has to only listen to these electrical impulses that come in and perceive using that. After perception, thought begins and a conversation starts. That I see, I've seen this before, this sound is very jarring, all that conversation which happens. So clearly, perception is not of thought, it is before thought. And if you do a calculation, we have millions of sensations every day. Every sensation must result in a perception. So perception happens millions of times every day, but we don't realize that we are perceiving. Now, At that moment of perception, isn't there comprehension, understanding, insight, everything? Only it is not expressed. So comprehension, understanding, insight, perception, again, is not a process of thought. But when this has to be articulated or expressed, it has to be expressed through the medium of thought and intellect. So the question arises, is all articulation and expression only through thought and intellect? So does perception, comprehension, understanding, insight require to be articulated at all? We think that only if it is so articulated, action can happen. But can't action happen directly from perception? Doesn't it happen in spontaneous actions, or when you are walking outside, like here we do here, and suddenly you see a snake, you jump. There's no thinking that happens, there's no logic, no reasoning, you just jump. So isn't that an example of an action which emanates directly from perception before this process of thinking has started? Now we also need to ask, is there a difference between emotion and feeling? If you look up the dictionary, what is emotion? There is a whole range of emotions, starting from admiration and going up to triumph. But the common factor in all these emotions is it is centered around the individual, the identity, thought, and our brain. All emotions are identified with these four: the individual, the identity of the individual, thought process, and the brain. But if you look at feeling, what would you categorize as a feeling? Affection, care, compassion, connection, kindness, forgiveness, patience. Do these arise from thought intellect, or are they all spontaneous? So looking at this, it seems perception can only happen if the brain is alive and active. If the brain is not alive, then there's no perception. Thought also requires the brain to be active so that thought can use all the information from there to recognize and imagine. Do feelings come from thought? We said no. Then where do they come from? So does this expression, understanding with the heart, stand for act with the whole being? Does this expression heart stand for acting with the whole being? Now, what or who is the whole being? There is a life energy in us, there is a body, and then there is this field of thought. If all these three are in harmony, is that acting with the whole being? Do we experience this acting with the whole being at any time? I think we do it many times. When we are listening to something completely, or we are looking at something intensely, is there not this harmony? There is only complete attention and involvement. There is no sense that I am looking. So in attention, is there any recognition that there is this thought happening and then this articulation has to happen? No conversation. So is it that attention can only happen when the identity of the individual is not active? Now, if the individual is not active, doesn't all this point to that feeling, the feeling that comes when I am not active? So is there any explanation for a feeling, or feeling is just feeling? And feeling, when expressed through the intellect, comes out as emotion. So what then is a gut feeling? Isn't a gut feeling a feeling that is deep down inside one, and which says, it just tells you that this is it? Animals seem to have this gut feeling. Uh, all literature talks about it. If you have read this book, Black Beauty, about the horse, there's that scene where the horse knows that the bridge is broken and it won't step on it. Although its rider is whipping it to move ahead, it refuses to move. It has a feel that this bridge is broken. Don't we all have that kind of a feeling at some point? This feeling that this is the direction to go. In business, particularly, when you have to take these quick decisions, aren't they taken just on that gut feeling? The feeling is that it is right, and you do it. So when we encourage the activity of thought and intellect, are we obscuring this capability to act from feeling? Is it important that living emanate from feeling and not thought, intellect, emotion? This is my question for the day. Is it important that living emanate from feeling and not from thought, intellect, and emotion?
The forum is open for the panel. So in case you have any question or you want to share some insight, please go ahead.
Yeah, maybe would like to take this challenge because it's a huge challenge that you are throwing at us. And yeah, first, thank you for this nice presentation on the different level of thinking, of intuition, and of gut feeling. And I think that your question, we can take it through different angles. First of all, you have been speaking about the different way that we can speak about the heart. You know, dil se, mere dil se. You know, so the thing is coming from my heart. But if you look at, for example, in English, to memorize something, we will say to learn by heart, isn't it? And it is a totally cognitive and intellectual process, just memorization of language. But actually, you know, it is a totally wrong expression which is used because when we learn, you know, if we was learning by heart, we would not memorize. We will, on the contrary, we will take out the memory which are already there because the heart is containing everything that we have. And what is very interesting is that in Hindi, for example, when you say, I think that something, whatever, how do you say that? You say, mere man mein. Okay, you say, mere man mein. But mere man mein, thinking, normally, when we speak about thinking, we think about the brain, right? But when you say mere man mein, it's here, isn't it? Mere man mein. Because it's referred to the mana, the earth of the entire subtle body. So we have a lot of trace in the language, which show that actually the thinking originates from something else than the only cognitive and intellectual part, that the thinking is coming from there. But now it's because, you know, even in the research on the brain and how the things are going, we all know that we have two parts of the brain, left part, right part. Left is driving the right part of the body and all the logical aspect and everything, and the right part is driving the left part of the body and the more creative and imaginative and art part. You know, the question is that what are the relations in the brain processes with this aspect of intuition and of gut feeling, which are actually slightly different, very different. So the gut feeling is something that everybody has because it is a lower part than the heart. We have it, it is part of the survival mechanism. It's part of, this is something that we come out with. This is, we are not learning it, we know. And for example, you know, when you read the stories of the fire brigade, the people who have to attend, you know, very big crisis, there's a big fire. For example, the 9/11, you know, the incredible story of the fire brigade, how they could save people. You know, there are absolutely no clue. There is no logical way of knowing where they have to go and how they have to behave. And they are very often, they are just behaving with their gut feeling. And you know, and the good firefighter will be the one who has a very strong gut feeling and goes at the right place at the right moment and can save the person, because there is no. So now you see the two difference in processes, and the question that you are asking, maybe it will be it will give some light on that. I don't think they are separated. You know, the intuition. Now let's go to the intuition part, which is higher than the gut feeling. Actually, it is really in the heart. You know, when we take a decision, we can go through our logical part. We can say, okay, pros and cons, positive point, negative point, and we make a balance, and we can sort of quantify the thing, you know, number one, number two, and we serial the cause effect. If I do that, what will be the effect of that? That means you are replicating with our intellect behavioral and situation that we can face in the future, and we are using our memory of our experiences of the past. Okay, this is a linear process. This is a cause and effect process. This is and the intuition, on the other hand, as you was really mentioning, is something immediate. In Sanskrit, we say kshan, the kshana, the moment, instant. And why it is so now? For some people, they look at intuition as an immediate logical development. You know, they say that it is all our memory, we can get them in one instant, but yet it will be a kind of instant reflection, but still we can look at the intellectual process. But actually, even if we stay on the materialist plan, the pure materialist plan, the difference with this intuition is that, first of all, we access not only our conscious memory, but we access also everything which is unconscious, which means that not only what we can remember, but things that we have forgotten, but our body, our heart, our skin, our emotion have not forgotten them. And we can suddenly call them, and they come to the rescue. And it goes even much further than that, because it can go to memory the moment of our birth. And it can even go to memory before we was born, before we had language, before we have thinking, before we have all that, you know. So that's the thing. Now I will just finish on that, is taking back what Sri Gopalan was speaking about, understanding. You know, if you look at understanding and explaining, can we explain something that we have not understood? Obviously not. Right. But the fact that something has been explained to us, does it mean that we have understood it? Not necessarily. You know, someone can explain you something, doesn't mean that you have understood it. So, and we are facing, in that case, you know, understanding and explanation, we are facing these two processes. The explanation is a linear process, cause and effect, serial process. You know, you explain, you use word to explain, language. So you have to put your sound and ideas one after another. Understanding is immediate. You can understand something just in one moment, in one channel, you know. And this understanding, which is why the understanding is part of the intuition and the heart learning, while the explanation is this logical part that we have. And while one can help other, they are very complementary. They can work together one after another. But at the same time, they are belonging to very, very different processes. And now after that, once we look at, we understand this materialist explanation of intuition and logical thinking. So we can also go further beyond the framework of the materialism. And when we think that we can perceive and only with our brain, you know, that's actually there are a lot of experiences. Not, you know, what is called last week we were speaking about that, the near-death experience. In the case of near-death experience, it seems that people can perceive without the usage of their brain. So, you know, there are maybe different paradigms through which we can look at all that. So now I throw back the ball.
Thank you, Pascal. Jyotam, would you wanna add something to it?
Sure. So, you know, I'm in a position now. I think I see both of these things very distinctly. And as Dr. Pascal put it so eloquently, I see the serial nature of how we try to build a process to reach a point of understanding. But that point of understanding is almost always a state. It's not part of the process. It's a distinct state. You know, it has a mixture of variables, and whether you reach it or not is you know, it's not guaranteed in a serial process. You know, you may trip on it and you may not. And I see now with the decisions that I make that a lot of the time, even though I'm built into going through the process, the decisions itself are usually state functions. I've decided something, sometimes immaterial, about where on the process of understanding it is. And then I'm often reaching into the tools of the understanding toolbox to try to explain my decision either to myself or to others. So, you know, I've been through the entire exercise of trying to build a, you know, literally Monte Carlo models of all the uncertainty into decisions to end with a probability, you know, that of a decision being good. And I found that often just doesn't work in life. Most of the time, the decision is there and you fall into it, or you trip into it, or you call it what you want, intuit yourself into it. And the rest of the time is really about trying to fit your decision into our known serial way of explaining things. So I find that as I go through decisions, whether they're in business or in life, they're almost always a state. They're a function I've reached. There's a point I've reached, and it's a mental state. And then I always go back to tools, the traditional tools of explaining and understanding, to try to transfer this state to other people. I've reached it. I just don't know how to get others there. And so I'm trying to explain it to others with logic and with all the other mechanisms that we need. But I see these as clearly distinct things. And as Dr. Pascal put it, it doesn't, you know, derive that you will reach this state with the tools you have. And you may use them, you may trip on it, or you may just find yourself there and not bother with the tools at all. And, you know, people, I think, understand things or make decisions or feel things without going through that process, which we've been taught, you know, without collecting all the data and processing it in our thoughts and looking at all the angles, and then, you know, ending up with something that is essentially derived. I think this entire swarms of decisions that people make right from the time they wake up and till they go to bed, which are actually just functions that they trip into, which we then try to fit in. So, you know, I think what probably bothers us is the fact that we can't reliably and predictably reach this state with the tools that we have. And this worries us. You know, this makes it something that, you know, we call gut, or, you know, how did you make that? It worries us that we can't do it every time. We love the reliability of having a line of code that always takes us to a certain path. And so we love our thoughts and we love our logic and we love a lot of these things because they're dependable. They always do the same thing. Whereas when we get a state which we haven't reached reliably and sometimes not able to duplicate, it probably niggles us. And that's why we have this little bit of a up and down between this, what we call intuition and gut, and what we call logic. When I think they're all part of the same thing and they're all really enabling us to make decisions in some way, whether they're decisions of tying your shoelace or whether they're important decisions. These are, as you said, they're married. But like a communication in a marriage, we're not always able to pass out the details. We know something's related and we like the one which we can explain. I don't know if that makes sense to everyone in the room, but that's my 2 bits on these 2 different things. And I think you can't tear them apart. And everyone has both, and it may come differently to different people, but they're tied in. They're together. I see now with my children as they're growing, I can almost see that a creation of, I can see them, the states work so well with them that we are trying to interpret how they got to that state with the logic that we gave them. And sometimes we don't get it. I can look at my kids and say, sometimes they just do things and we just say, well, they just did it. But how? They did it because the state function existed. They fell into it. It's part of them. It's part of the entire system. It's just we cannot always predict when it comes. But that's what makes it interesting. And I think that's what makes it in many ways fun. When I trip into decisions I make, I'm always convinced. And it's kind of humorous that I'm trying to tell people something I know with a degree of uncertainty. I find that funny, in many ways.
Veerada Gunji, would you want to add something or share?
I don't know what to add. I mean, I don't know. I just have 2-3 questions. Are we discussing thought or are we discussing a feeling? Is it possible to discuss a feeling? And I go to the question that Gopalan had raised at the start. Should life be led by thought or by feeling? I want to know, is it possible to lead life by feeling without thought? Is it even possible to intellectualize it? The fact that we are discussing this and the fact that we've used I think at least 20 times in every conversation. I mean, when I say something, it is purely what I think. Is it possible to have a conversation around feeling? Is it possible at all to do that? And if it is not possible, and if we are only discussing thought, then does the feeling part completely get lost? So I don't know. I put this question to Gopalan sir.
Let me take it from where what Uttam said. See, children, young children, don't seem to have this conflict about feeling and thought, right? But they're using their thinking. They're also spontaneous and they are extraordinarily creative. Are we trying to direct that creativity and in the process killing it as they grow up, whether it's through the education system or even if they sit with us at home? All our anxieties, which make us do whatever we do with them, don't they come from us where our intellect is dominating? It's not in harmony. We are not in harmony. So are we killing that creativity which is there in every human being in those early ages?
You had mentioned, Gopalan sir, it's a very important question that you've raised. I don't know the answer, but I just want to ask you this question. In your, when you spoke at the start, you used the word instinctive action, and you said that when a man is walking and a snake comes up, he jumps across. That's an instinctive reaction. It's a gut feeling. You see, if you're a soldier, for instance, as a journalist, we are told thought many years ago to, I mean, when you're in the molding stages, you're taught to develop something called a new sense. And instinct is also something that is inculcated over period time. It is something that is a product of experience. At some level, Black Beauty may have gone across the bridge earlier that was broken and is using that earlier experience, which turned into a thought and then evolved into an instinct for it to survive in future. Most of these things are survival instincts. Whether you're in a business, if you're in a business like Uttam is, he would be taking decisions on a day-on-day basis over a period of time. He would have developed the instinct to take the right decision. Now, it is difficult to figure out whether it is the gut feeling. I mean, it may just come across. You see everything, all the logic, all the numbers seem correct, but you know that it's wrong. There's something wrong, and that comes out of experience. We also call this experience. Like, for instance, in the military they call it tajurba in Hindi, which is experience to say where is the attack going to come from. It's an instinct that people develop. So that feeling. I just want to know, the core of this. When you say should life be led by thought, as you say, children at some level are far less filled with knowledge and experience, that they live more in the thought, in the feeling rather than the thought. As we grow as adults, doesn't that same feeling over a period of time turn into thought? And how do you arrest that process as individuals as we grow? Is really a question. I mean, how, and if I cannot arrest it in a case like mine, where it is possibly I've already started living out of thought, how do I reverse the process?
Yeah, see, this wanting to arrest and wanting to reverse again is another thought. Huh? So that is why I'm asking, the moment we have allowed the intellect to start dominating, have we given up on the harmony of the being? And I think nowhere do you see it as clearly as when it comes to this deep conviction in us that our bodies are not capable of taking care of themselves. We have to invasively go in and do everything because the body is not capable. And that's what we have made out of the health system. And then you can see how we start panicking and reacting. This is what is happening with every ailment that comes around. So, very deep down, when the body has an ailment, is it being cured because of all that invasive processes that have happened? Or is actually the body healing itself in spite of whatever we are doing? This doesn't seem to be a question which we adults with so many years of experience are even willing to question.
I would like to say something on what you had said before. There was a question on which is related to education, how we allowing the creativity of the child to continue, are we killing it? So I have a very simple answer to that and very clear answer. School is killing the creativity of the children. Definitely, I have no two thought on that. And which is why we have to change the school system and we have to change the education. But we are not here to speak about education. And yeah, you know, at the birth, they are saying that we know without learning. So the intuition is somewhere it is linked with something like that. You know, we have the impression that we have intuition, or it's not the result of what we have learned and we apply this learning, but something which comes just like that. Now, you know, there is this epistemologist and psychologist, Jean Piaget, the French psychologist, child psychologist. He has spent his life with this question only. You know, so how do we come to a stage where we look quite ignorant in the childhood to a stage where we can learn so many different things. So, but he has started with the basic thing, which is instinct. You know, when we come on earth, we have things that we have not learned, which are called the instinct. Okay, so the small child, for example, will know exactly how to go to drink the milk from the mother. He will know exactly what to do. He will know all the very tiny psychomotor skills which are required to drink, which are very complicated actually. And you know, according to Piaget and his entire theory, is that from this basic instinct, we can develop them and use them to expand and to assimilate them and to expand toward the new skills that we acquire. You know, we develop them. So definitely that there is something, and there are so many things that we have not learned and that we know. So now, if there are these things, so where are they coming from? You know, for example, there is this every 4 years, I think, in America, in the not USA, but the continent, American continent, there is a big migration of butterflies. It is every 4 years, and there are hundreds of thousands of butterflies who are coming from, who are crossing kilometers and kilometers, and they go into one specific place. Okay, now the lifespan of a butterfly is, you know, nothing to compare with 4 years. So they have not learned where to go, but they always go to the same place. So from where are they deriving this knowledge? And how to go there and why to go there? So definitely, and then we are touching, and again, I would like nevertheless to touch this point, and I know that it is it may be a controversial point, but you know, again, coming back to this near-death experience, people, they have described saying that, you know, they are out of their body, definitely, and they can see things that, why some of them, their brain is dead, the heart has stopped beating. It can last for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, which is why when we say actually near-death experience, it is a wrong expression. It is a temporary death. They are dead physically and brain dead, you know, and for a certain time. And despite that, they can perceive, see, hear, you know, whole the system of perception. And it's not the brain which is doing that. And they can perceive things which are out of the room where they are, in any case. And they are through sedation and under sedation and all that. So which is why, and you know, when we speak about the consciousness, is the consciousness only an intellectual part of the brain, or is it something much bigger than that? And you know, and even the perception, the physical perception, is it only linked with the organ of perception, the eyes and all that? And now just to complete again on these two aspects, intellectual and logical and you know, intuitive or immediate. You know, even among our senses, there are very different processes which are going on. You know, for example, we have the audio system and the visual system. The audio system, which we are using to communicate, to speak, the language is based on our audio system. This is typically, we have to put syllable after syllable, and it has to be sequential, it has to be serial. You know, you cannot express a one-page content, 300 words, in one moment. You will have to take the time, right? But your visual system doesn't need that, which is why the people who are reading and the written part of the language is becoming visual. People who are reading, they can develop a skill where they can read at incredible speed. Why? Because they will not read each word. They will not go into this syllable. They will not go into this area. They will take a page, click a photograph, send the photo, visual photo to the brain, and the brain will make the process. And so that their perceptual senses are free to go to the next page. And they can photograph a page in 2 or 3 seconds. And which is why, you know, we have inbuilt all these processes which allow us to do that. Now, when we come on Earth, when we take this incarnation, we come with certain instinct, and some are linked to survival. For example, the fear is linked to survival. Without fear, we cannot survive. People who are a child, maybe who has absolutely no fear, will be in danger permanently. So we have this instinct which are linked to survival for sure, survival of the body. But for sure, it is not only the survival. I'm very convinced of that. And when we look at the evolution of the consciousness and the learning curve that we develop, you know, during our life, and ultimately we reach this global consciousness, I know that it is not only this linear process which is there, but probably we need also this linear process to slow down the thing, you know, to go from, let's say, classical mechanics, Newtonian mechanics, to a system of entanglement, of superposition, of quantum mechanics, where things are instantaneous and they don't need time to evolve.
Yes, but from that, what I would like to ask is, see, the feeling of generosity, the feeling, the sensitivity which says somebody else is starving, let me share. Is that coming from the intellect? That's not coming from the intellect. That's not coming from the survival mechanism. What makes me want to share? Right? What is that connect between this living being and another living being? So, without a doubt, all experience is based on the record. Sometime we have experience, we are acting from that. And that raises a very interesting question. Where is the storehouse of all the memory of this collective, of all these experiences? Is it inside the brain? If it is, where? And if it is inside the brain, then it should get lost when you die. So, is there a collective memory bank? And that's what the internet and the mobile phone have shown is possible. You don't need all your memory to be sitting inside your instrument. It can be sitting somewhere else. You only download what you need. You have access. So are our brains instruments that are able to access a collective? Now, unfortunately, questions like this are said to be unscientific, right? Because there is a certain framework which you say is science, and anything outside that is non-scientific. And then we say, don't bring all this question in. It's unscientific. It has no rationale, right? So science, as we have understood it, has become just that material science. That science cannot even accept that there really is something called a mind. Mind is just activity of the brain inside the skull, and that's all it is. But we have enough wisdom through the ages available of people who have had insights into something else and point a finger. It's for us to make that journey and then ask, is it not, what is the importance of bringing all this into our living and then determining the direction of our living? Or should all this come only when you are 70 years old and now it's time for you to do philosophical study?
It's an interesting framework that you're pointing out. I just just to, there's a movie called 7 Years in Tibet. I don't know if you've seen it. There's just one dialogue in that movie where there's this German mountain climber who meets this Tibetan woman, and he shows her on the newspaper all the achievements that he has had in his life and his name reported. And she says that your philosophy teaches you to find joy, find gratification in all your achievements. My philosophy teaches me to find joy in abstaining from these achievements. So there is a philosophical mismatch when we talk about, and when we talk about science, yes, you see, there are questions which don't have answers, like deep consciousness. In fact, the question that you raised a little earlier, it is a very controversial question. Is the body healing itself despite the medical procedures? In the present context, if you turn around and say, is the vaccine, is it what is protecting you, or should you just remain without a vaccine in this COVID crisis and live along with it? These are very dangerous, controversial questions. I don't know where the answer is. I mean, it is ultimately one can, the only way I can see it is that while I have the right to risk the consequences with my body and my life, I don't have the right to risk the consequences of this understanding. Even if you gut feeling, one may believe it, but the framework that you're living in as a social economic framework that one is living in forces you not to think in that context. So until we reverse that framework, maybe when we are discussing gut feeling itself, we are possibly taking the security provided by that socio-economic framework and still discussing gut feeling instead of really abandoning it. Are we really ready to abandon that? Which means that then I won't have access to internet or have access to a laptop in the Zoom conversation. I shouldn't actually be having that. When we look at that. So I mean, I'm just asking that. Just thinking aloud in that process, as you're saying, that while it is important for science to expand the questioning process, how much and how it expands, and how are we going to inculcate the ability, as Dr. Pascal was saying, about the consciousness. And a striking moment for me was when the Dalai Lama was giving a lecture at NIMHANS here in Bangalore. Uh, there was a doctor who turned up and said that if you believe that there is life after death, why don't you demonstrate it convincingly that there is life after death? And I think the response to that was that it is not about me demonstrating it, it is about your ability to understand it. And if you don't have the ability to understand it, I cannot demonstrate it. So that is what feeling is, according to me. I mean, at least from listening to this conversation, to Uttam, you and Dr. Pascal, it's just a spontaneous thought that is coming out, not a spontaneous feeling. A spontaneous thought is that some of these things are understood deep down, and the more we communicate it with words, it requires a testimony, it requires proof. And unfortunately, these things cannot be proven with it has to be understood, as Dr. Pascal was saying. I'm explaining, but I think it is difficult for me to explain it, but I'm sure somebody can understand it, relate with it, or understand with it without words. You remember, you had in your speech, you had said about understanding and explanation. Somebody can explain something, but it's not sure whether they understood it. So maybe that's where the problem is when it comes to external trying to communication, beyond the self, beyond the body. What I understand, what I feel, this thought, these things are within me. The moment it comes out of me, it comes into a different framework, and it comes into a socio-economic framework where it's very difficult to explain or even share it without showing scientific evidence.
So if I see at the first step that all that expression that comes from my thought and intellect is going to be within a framework, which means it is limited, would I not then ask, look, this framework can't be removed, so it will always be subject to this limitation. Is there a way of being outside the framework? Would I ask that question or not?
And along with that, another question, is that framework more in our heads? Does the framework really exist, or is it in our heads that we have created an imaginary framework, assuming that to be real?
Exactly, precisely. And what implication does that have on the way we live, the way we learn? And only if there is an understanding there will education be any different. So the system is not going to change unless I'm ready for it first. So therefore, I don't talk about changing the education system. First, I must feel that this is the intelligent thing to do. The education has to flow from that.
Well, I like to think of it a bit like, getting a hug. Say you've had a rough day. You can explain how rough your day has been and all the things that made it rough. And then someone can explain how they're trying to make you feel better, and there's no use. Or you can just have a hug, which is technically potentially just contact, which is sensory, and then all these things. But hey, you feel better all of a sudden. And it's tricky to explain it. And when you try and put it in the contextual framework of all the things we would normally use scientifically to explain it, it gets very complicated, but it does the job. So obviously it's there, and it exists, and there are ways in which we do things which are difficult to explain or difficult to linearize, for want of a better word, but have non-linear effects. So we live with these, and I think we continuously probe them to try to explain them better. But we all know they're there, and they're part of the system, they're part of us, they're part of the evolutionary space we're in, and sometimes we should just use them without thinking too much about them.
That is precisely what I was meant when I was asking, is it possible to live from feeling? Right? Rather than be driven by this whole analytical approach and me thinking I'm in charge of the show. Am I in charge of the show?
This show you are, I think.
I'm not.
I'm being facetious.
So we have
Yeah.
one question from YouTube, I think.
I can't. Is there a disturbance in the audio? I can't hear.
No,
what
it's clear. It's absolutely clear, I guess. There is one question: why are silences uncomfortable? Is the tradition of conversation something normal to human beings?
Yes.
I think that question's from Sakib, no?
Yes.
So have we been trained to be uncomfortable if we don't have answers? Every question cannot have an answer. So what? Can one learn to just remain with the question? Do answers come from the intellect, or when you hold a question, answers are revealed?
So there's just a quick example. I mean, this is a funny side thought to this question of does every question has an answer? You see, in television news, there is something called filling the time. You're supposed to, like, for instance, we've started having a conversation. Now we can't all be silent, right? None of us know the answers to the questions we are raising, but we have to say something to fill the time, right? So I think somewhere deep down the instinct is this over a period of time. The instinct is it also depends on who is asking the question. For instance, if Gopalan uncle is asking the question, then I'm not forced to give an answer because he's supposed to guide me with the answer. Correct? So, but when it is when it's my son who's turning around and asking you a question, as a parent, you're forced to give an answer to it. So I guess silence should be the answer, but unfortunately it's not.
No, can the answer to a question be another question? See, why does it have to be an answer which ends the conversation?
Yeah, there's the story of this small boy who asked a question to his father, and he asked something, and the father starts to explain him, the answer and giving all the details. And the child look at his father. I say, why for such a short question you have such a long answer? And I think that's the essence of it, But when we are looking for answer, for example, I have been translating old text, Buddhist text from Sanskrit to French. It had never been translated into European languages. It's a tantra, okay? And there was very little place where I could ask question and find answer because it's an esoteric text. There is no anybody living tradition, to transmit this tradition. So for a lot of things, I was just facing the text only, and the language itself, from Sanskrit, it's very difficult sometimes to really get what is the meaning of that, because one word is actually one full sentence, and a full sentence which can have 50 different meaning, And very often, what I was doing, I will take the thing, think about that, and say, okay, now I send this question to the universe, in the air, and let the answer come to me. And I can tell you, I assure you, that within 24 hours maximum, I will get the answer. And from so many different sources. It could be someone saying something to somebody else, and I would be, yes, it is there. Or I open a book which is absolutely not related to that, and suddenly I say, this is my answer. Or I open my email, and on my email, there's someone who is speaking about something totally different, but I got my answer. Actually, the answer, they are not only coming from our logical understanding and logical transcription of the of our experience, but sometimes it comes just like that when we are able to open up and to allow this answer to come. And it is where it is not the gut feeling, but the heart. You know, when we can open our heart, then answer will come there and they will be translated. And very often we know that, you know, it's very often when we have an important decision to take and we have thought about that, we say sleep on it. Don't go too fast, you just wait. And the next day morning, very often, you get the answer. And because why? Because we have got access to our own subconscious. And the subconscious is the door of what Gopalan was saying, you know, this sort of Akashic record which is there. And we have access to that. It's just that we have, and yes, all of us, like Gautam was saying, we all have both access to both way of thinking and understanding. But, you know, because in the school, we have killed the creativity, we have killed the spontaneity, we have killed, you know, Anju, very often she takes this example. If I ask you just on the spot like that to draw a scenery, you know, we are here and there are people listening on YouTube. Draw a scenery, you know, put your finger and draw a scenery. What you will do? I don't have even to describe to you. The mountain, the sun, the house, the river, isn't it? So, and she is putting this type of this question in so many different seminars, and thousands and thousands of people, especially in India, from north to south, from east to west, out of 1.3 billion people, with such a diversity in culture, diversity in languages. You know, this is a country which has the biggest number of languages. How is it that each and every Indian will draw the scenery in the same way? Because of school conditioning. And this is where the thing lies, that yes, we have everything, but the school, the education system has conditioned us to forget about this, to even to go far from that, this spontaneity, creativity, this what is really there for a child. For the child, you know, the question you are asking, for the child, the answer is clear. Yes, of course, we can live with our only emotion without this monkey jumping there incessantly. He has no problem, the child. The child is so spontaneous. It is us as adults, we have lost that. And it takes so much effort to just get it. It's Picasso was saying, no? How many years it has taken him just to learn how to draw like a child. And when he found that, he became one of the greatest painters in the world. And that's the secret. Let's go back to that. And for that, us as adults, we have to train again ourselves and to again acquire these abilities and these, but they are there. And I just want to finish speaking about my personal experience. And, you know, we have lost with my wife, we have lost our child. She was 12 years old, okay? And it was a sudden infection, something absolutely sudden. And we was not expecting, within 48 hours, we have lost her. She was in perfect health. And then the question of, you know, how do we heal us? And, you know, this question, of course, has come to us. And after that, it has been such a strong experience, because this is the ultimate experience that we can have in this incarnation, in this life. This is the ultimate test that we can go through. And after that, you know, because I've been so shaken, but at the same time, it has opened so many doors. You know? It's like Rumi said, it is only through the crack that the light can come. And this crack was so big in the earth, I can tell you that all the light could come there. And it is after that I've got this experience of what is called out-of-body experience, that my consciousness could have gone out of my body and I could perceive, live, experience, have the entire, you know, what in the Tibetan Buddhism, in one of the yoga is the transfer of consciousness, where you learn, you spend years, and in fact, when I was learning Buddhism, my master was a master of this transfer of consciousness. And at that time, I was very interested. It was a totally intellectual interest that I had. I was so passionate by the fact that someone in such a different culture could have such a strong belief. And for him, it was not a belief. It was the certitude that, yeah, the consciousness is not linked to the physical body, and it can. And it was, for me, it was a very interesting ethnological study, you know. I could never think that one day I could have this experience. And until I have got the experience, it was only an intellectual process. And it's referred to what the Dalai Lama said, you know, how can you prove me that there is a life after life? If you are not able to experience it and to understand it, nobody can explain it to you.
Very true. So it's 7:06. Do you have any remarks just to end the talk, sir? Gopalan, sir?
Oh, I think today's discussion has opened up many, many questions. Yeah, we deliberately stayed away from education, but you see, ultimately you will come to that. You can't avoid it. But I'm only saying, can that question begin with ourselves first? We can take it to education, but if we don't have the question, what will be the education that comes from that? Right? So I think that questioning has to start with us first. And I think today's discussion was very well in that direction.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Gopalan, sir. Thank you, Tamji. Thank you, Dr. Pascal. And thank you, Veera Raghavji. And thank you, everyone who was watching us from YouTube. And we would like to see you again on the next Saturday at the same time with some new topic. Meanwhile, in case you have any questions for Gopalan, sir, or any suggestions, you can write to me. You must be having my email ID, that is shakil@mindmingle.org. So you can email me that, and we will keep sending you information about all our upcoming events. Thank